Another 3-point spread that we have is the next one at noon. Baylor at SMU, again, noon Eastern time on the CW network. Storyline for me is, can Baylor bounce back and deliver a major blow to SMU's hopes of returning to the college football playoff? So Baylor last week opened a season with a 38-24 loss to Auburn on Friday night. The Bears had serious issues stopping Auburn's rushing attack. They allowed 321 yards on the ground. Now, these first two games for Baylor, the Auburn game, the SMU game, they won't affect their standing in the Big 12, which ultimately, if Baylor's going to make the playoff, it's going to have to win the Big 12, I would imagine. I don't think they're going to get an at-large spot. But still, it's a good barometer for Baylor to see where they might stack up in that wide-open Big 12 conference right now. They're trying to bounce back this week on the road against SMU, a team that made the playoff last year and is right now a top 25 team too. They hope to crash the playoff once again in 2025. But really the storyline is, can Baylor bounce back, and SMU looking to show, hey, we are still a playoff contender this year too?
Absolutely. It's a big game for both. And SMU, look, again, does this affect their standing in the ACC? Not necessarily, but we saw last year that, some big out-of-conference wins and you get the momentum rolling and you can put yourself in at-large positioning the same way as Duke. This is a huge game for them, right? If you eventually, let's say you end up second in the ACC again, and in SMU's case again, then you put yourself in position if you're 11-1 or 11-2 to at least be under consideration for that. It worked last year, but this is a huge game for both teams. And I think for Baylor, just for the morale and the feel of the team after last week, they got physically dominated against Auburn last week. They need to be able to bounce back and go, okay, we can take that punch in the mouth, we can win a big game, and then get into Big 12 play feeling a little bit better about yourself as well.
Absolutely. So you have Sawyer Robertson, Bryson Washington, and the Baylor offense against SMU's defense in this one. What should we know about this one?
So we talked so much on Sunday when we reviewed the Auburn-Baylor game about how much Auburn's offense physically dominated Baylor's defensive line. Let's turn this over to the other side now, because this is something we didn't talk about too much. They got dominated on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And yes, Sawyer Robertson has to be, he's got to be a little bit more accurate, right? They need to get to running the ball more. But at the end of the day, this Baylor offensive line needs to play better as well. They got beat in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Keldrick, Falk, and those guys for Auburn are really good, and they won the battle in that game. Baylor's offensive line last week as a unit, 57.4 PFF grade, 51.4 pass blocking grade, not good at all, and Sawyer Robertson pressured over 38% of the time. 62.2 run blocking grade. Max, Baylor only ran for, excluding sacks, 80, I believe it was 83 yards last week. Only 11 of those yards were before contact. So they just were not finding any creases in the run game. And one of the things that shocked me too, I don't take out sacks because we do it the proper way here. Sawyer Robertson didn't have a carry last week. And down the stretch last year, I felt like he was kind of not maybe the main rushing threat, because you had Washington and you had Dawson Pendergrass, who's out for the year this year. That's unfortunate. But I felt like Sawyer Robertson was at least a threat as a runner. And that just never happened last week. And I just think this Baylor offensive line, I was looking at this. So their 6 highest graded games up front last year. They won all of them. And then the other 7, they went 2-5. So really, I mean, I know it's flashy. It's Sawyer Robertson, it's Bryson Washington, it's Cole Wilson, Michael Trigg, Josh Cameron, all the athletes that they have. That's great. But if you can't block anybody, you don't win ball games. And I think that really is the case, because especially in the case of Robertson, you don't want him making throws under pressure, because the accuracy goes. The accuracy comes and goes with him, especially when he's throwing off his back foot and he's throwing off balance. We saw that last week, and they have to run the ball better, because I'll be honest with you, any game, Sawyer Robertson, whoever, any game where my quarterback's throwing the ball 55 times, I'm not in on that. That shouldn't be more than 40. They can't throw it 55 times and win.
And for a Baylor offense that has a top 15 running back in the country, in my opinion, Bryson Washington, you got to be doing a lot better in the run game.
Absolutely. You can't finish a game with just 83 run yards, right? So I think the other thing, too, now is I'm curious to see what SMU's defensive line looks like against a better opponent. They were good last week, again, FCS opponent, but you got good players. You got Cam Robertson. You've got Jeffrey Emba. You've got Wu Spencer, Ja'Kai Lang, Terry Webb. This a deep defensive line with not a lot of household names. I don't know if it's as good good as Elijah Roberts and Jared Harrison-Hunt, the crew they had last year, that was one of the best run defenses in the country, especially. And that you've got, obviously, the great safeties returning. I like SMU's back seven, but this Baylor offensive line that struggled last week against a relatively new unit for SMU, this is a very interesting matchup to me. Because if they lose this matchup, especially in the run game, and they struggle to run the ball, then they're in real danger of losing this football game. They need to be better. I know on both sides we're going to talk about this a lot with Baylor, but they need to be better up front before we even start talking about, okay, Sawyer Robertson and his errors and the receivers and Bryson Washington, all of that stuff. If they're not better on the offensive line this week, they will be in serious trouble because this SMU unit is sound.
Absolutely. So my match on the other side of the ball, I know Baylor in week 1 against Auburn, their defensive line got dominated as Auburn ran for over 300 yards. But I'm looking at this game, Kevin Jennings, the star quarterback for SMU, against Baylor and their too high shell. So Kevin Jennings entered this year as a top 10 quarterback in the country for us after a really good debut season as a starter for SMU last year. He was 10th in the country with an 85 passing grade last year. He especially punished defenses that ran cover 0, cover 1, cover 3, essentially 0 safeties or 1 safety on the field. 87.2 passing grade in those situations with 0 safeties or 1 safety. That was 10th in the country. He was far more average when teams played cover 2, cover 4 quarters, a lot like that. 75 passing grade, 43rd in the country, 5 big-time throws, 5 turnover-worthy plays. And you see right there, Baylor used a too high shell 73.5% of the time last year, one of the highest rates in the country. They ran quarters, cover 4, 50.5% of the time, which was 3rd in the FBS. And Dalton even saw it in the Auburn game. They were playing so much quarters, afraid of Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton Jr. beating them deep, that it hurt them in run defense, and they kept playing quarters the entire game, basically. So I'm looking at, okay, Kevin Jennings, who is excellent against 1 high or 0 high, against 2 high, he's far more average. And Baylor, like I said, runs one of the highest rates of 2 high defenses in college football. That's going to be the big matchup for me on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I agree. And look, and one of the things I kind of took a grievance with last week with Baylor playing that much too high was that Auburn was running all over you. You got to bring somebody up and help out and run support, especially with Jackie Marshall out. Now, this week it might be different. I think I'm more of a fan of, like you just mentioned, staying in those deep shells, staying in those quarter shells, staying in too high looks, because this SMU offense, they want to run with tempo and they want to get vertical. We know Rhett Lashley. We've seen it for years. Rhett Lashley wants to get down the field with his passing game, and we've seen also when that isn't available, Kevin Jennings has struggled in those moments. There have been times where he starts improvising and then he might throw balls into a tight window where maybe you don't necessarily want that. So I'm looking for the balance of that between A, does Jennings feel like he's forcing it into those coverages, and B, I want to see SMU run the ball, right? Brashard Smith's not there anymore. You've got TJ Harden, you've got Chris Johnson, you've got Derek McFall. They're kind of rotating these running backs. It's not just one guy like it was last year with Brashard Smith. Obviously Jennings is a capable runner himself, but it's a different style of offense than Baylor saw with Auburn last week, where it's very downhill. This tight ends, Jackson Arnold was so heavily involved in the run game. Jennings doesn't usually get that heavily involved, like in the same style that Arnold did. But I think I'm more of a fan of Baylor's defense and that approach this week against this SMU team. I'm with you on that. I'm curious to see how much SMU can respond with the run game, if they can, in the same way that Baylor did last week.
Yeah, I don't think SMU's
Auburn did last week.
Yeah, I don't think SMU's run game is as strong as what Auburn's was going into with Auburn's offensive line and Jackson Arnold and their running backs. But Kevin Jennings is the star of the show on the offense, but like I said, he's pretty average against 2 high shells. So with Baylor's defense running that amount, over 70% of the time last year, and a very heavy amount in the Auburn game too, it's going to be interesting to see if Kevin Jennings can have success against Baylor in week 2. All right, Dalton, will SMU win against Baylor at home, or will the Bears get back on track and deliver a big upset victory over the Mustangs?
This is a tough call, because I think you're going to have a Baylor team that really does not want to start their season 0-2. And SMU obviously would be a big win for them at home. SMU, the one thing for me last week, and I know it's sometimes funky with such wide scores and you're playing FCS teams and you're really beating on teams sometimes that you're just more talented than. I don't think they played that well last week. I don't think it was spectacular, especially offensively. I think there's some matchups here. I do think Baylor's offensive line can play better against this SMU unit. Now, I think SMU's got good players up front. I think it's a very competitive matchup. They don't have a Keldrick Falk and some of those guys that Auburn has, those SEC caliber players. So I think Baylor's offensive line could play a little bit better. I like the approach they bring on defense. I think SMU really needs to run the ball in this game. They need to have balance in this game to have success. And I think, one thing for me, and maybe Romello Brinson got away out at wide receiver on one deep ball last week. I think Chris Johnson is probably the running back with the most speed. I don't know that this SMU, I need to see it against a better opponent. I don't know if this SMU offense has a ton of speed individually, right? Obviously, they run the entire operation at a fast tempo. I don't know if the players have a ton of speed. It looked kind of, even last week against an FCS team, kind of methodical at times to me. And I think against this Baylor team, it really helps to have guys who can make those explosive plays. We saw that from Auburn. So I think we get a high-scoring game here. I think Baylor bounces back. I'm going to take the Bears 34-30. I think there's a lot of different ways this game could go, though, because Jackie Marshall right now looks like he's questionable at best. I don't think he's practiced yet this week as of us recording this.
Defensive tackle, yeah.
The high ankle sprain, he's their best run defender. Dave Aranda has basically said if we don't have him, we really got to get creative with our run defense. That would concern me if Jackie Marshall's out big time up front, because, again, I think SMU, I don't think this is the game and the defense against Dave Aranda that you want Kevin Jennings to try to carry you and try to make all the plays, because we know sometimes that can work. And we've seen some other times with Kevin Jennings where there's some bad stretches too, putting the ball in danger. So I'm going to take Baylor. I think they're a desperate team. I don't think SMU is quite as good as Auburn, especially in the trenches. I think they just find a way to win this one in what I think is a pretty high-scoring game.
I can't believe that we are both going with two upsets to start, because I really thought when I put together my predictions, like, okay, I'm going to have Duke and Baylor, and Dalton's probably going to pick the other two, and I also have Baylor. I have Baylor 28-27. Should be a great ball game. I think Baylor's run game will have more success this week against SMU's new-look defensive line. And Kevin Jennings makes a couple of mistakes against Baylor's two high shells, too. So I think the Bears will rebound from their season-opening loss to Auburn with a very close victory over the Mustangs. And, yeah, both you and I, Dawn, because SMU currently is number 16 in the AP poll. They might actually jump into the top 15 in about a half hour when that comes out for week 2. We both have two top 15 teams losing to unranked teams right now.
Yeah, it's tough because SMU, they're top 15, 16 because of last year, but there's a lot of new pieces there, right? They lost a lot of key pieces, and that's the hard part to project forward. But I think it just goes to show you also, 7 of these 9 games that we're previewing today, one score spreads.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like 6, if not all of those, are really close to coin flip games. I think this is another one. I think you got a great football game in your hands down there.
All right, so we both have Duke beating Illinois. We both have Baylor beating SMU, two teams that are currently ranked in the top 20, could be the top 15 in about a half hour. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I can't believe that we both picked that. I was actually hoping that I could make up some ground on you with my two upset picks.
I was very in between on it.
So was I, yeah.
It's incredibly close. If Baylor is not better in the trenches, then they'll lose that game. And SMU's defensive line fascinates me because I don't think they have the star power they did last year, but there's a lot of solid players, and they got a deep rotation of solid guys. If they can win that battle up front and they hold Baylor to less than, say, 110 or 120 on the ground or so, SMU could very well win that game, yeah.
Kenny Porter's right hand in the chat, big SMU fan, I believe, saying SMU's going to win by 10. In that one.
Could
happen.
I would not be shocked by basically any outcome in that game.
It's going to be really fun.
I'm telling you, that's a fun one.